on that website from pictures of the detention centers in Texas, pictures that were released or leaked by an ICE agent. And I remember Eric Holder and the other Department of Justice and other Obama administration officials, saying, oh, these conditions, which of course we agree the conditions were horrible, but no one questioned why these pictures were leaked. And no one went after the agents who leaked the pictures. And the reason why they were leaked is to rev up the right wing. And in fact, this was one of the first times that we saw large demonstrations of Klan-like elements that even were able to stop buses of children who were being taken to detention centers in California. Somehow, like Trump right now, the right wing has so much more power than anybody else. They were able to stop the bus, and you can imagine all that it would take for the left to be able to do a similar action, how the cops would come against us, the repression, and so forth and so on. So we have to look at what's happened with these children and with these families since they came and what led to the raids that happened over the weekend. Now, one of the good things that has happened from, well, I shouldn't say a good thing, but what was of note is that the immigrant rights movement, the many lawyers, the many workers' associations, the many immigrant advocates that exist in this country quickly and swiftly came forward, including in New York, where I'm hoping that comrades Tony and Larry will talk about what happened in the streets today here in New York City. But across the country, immediately, once the news surfaced about the raids that had been taking place and pictures were released about SWAT teams, taking the backpacks of children and throwing them on trucks and so forth, all these organizations came forward and immediately did all kinds of work. And we have heard from Atlanta and Texas and Houston in particular, the comrades and movement in Los Angeles, here in New York. All across the country, there have been a swift response of press conferences, of know your rights actions. Progressives in Brooklyn are going to the schools and passing out literature and telling people, what to do. The Salvadoran consulate issued a warning to everyone that would listen: don't answer the door. If someone comes to the door, don't answer. Because what ICE is doing and what the movement is showing quickly is that what ICE is doing is that they came to one of the homes in Georgia, for example, and they said they were looking for John Catt. And they weren't really looking for John Catt. They were looking for Larry. And they used John as a pretext to get in the door. And so they had no papers that had Larry's name on it, but that's what the pretext that they used to get into the door. And then they deported people that way. And so all the lawyers, one lawyer in Brooklyn in particular, or somewhere here in New York City, by 2 o'clock Monday afternoon had 200 calls to his office. People were not going to school, children were not being sent to school, people were not going to work. So even though we may not know the extent of how the raids are going to be carried out in the coming days, we do know that the goal of continuing to terrorize and fearmonger among the community has definitely been a success. So it's been wonderful, to see all the response, the immediate emails, immediate press conferences, immediate actions, all around the country, people going into neighborhoods and telling the undocumented and communities what to do in response to these raids. So we need to know that many of the children and mothers in particular, but all of the immigrants that are facing this in Central America, no matter their age or sex, are all being rushed in a very unfair process. And it's so blatant that already, for example, the Southern Poverty Law Center has called for a Freedom of Information Act. and has already exposed how unfair this process has been. And it's so unfair that on Wednesday, some immigrant lawyers were able to prevent the deportation of a family already. 3 families were not deported who had been picked up over the New Year's Eve weekend because it was so blatant. Most of these people, the government says, has a deportation order, but many of these migrants have not had their day in court. And so it's so blatant. One thing to keep in mind that's very important is that given the conditions by which these families are coming in this period, this particular group that is being targeted from Central America, are labeled by the United Nations, even the UN, is pointing out that these are not economic migrants. And of course, we want to show our absolute solidarity with economic migrants as well. But in this particular case, because of the social conditions in Central America, because of the gang wars, because of the drug-related violence, because of U.S. imperialism's decades-long economic and political intervention in the area, these particular migrants are able to be and should be called refugees. And if the government would acknowledge that, then they would get immediate refugee status and they could win asylum and they would not be deported. And that's why so many progressive organizations are completely outraged by this process, because it's so unjust and it's so unfair. When President Barack Obama had that press conference about gun violence and he was crying for the children, which of course we cry for those children too. We cry for the children of Sandy Hook. And I mean, he probably did feel that, you know, who doesn't feel that? But he was doing it at the same time that he was deporting little children. And so the immigrant rights advocates were quick to point out how hypocritical the White House is. You know, why not cry for the Palestinian children? Why not cry for the Syrian children? You know, why? You know, so there's all kinds of bombs, there's all kinds of guns and all kinds of bombs that happen, you know, not just the Sandy Hook. You know, while we, of course, want to show our solidarity with those families, of course. So I want to, you know, talk about one of the incidents. This is what happened in Dallas. The woman who gave her story, and I think she might be the one that is not getting deported after all. I'm not sure about that. But she talked about how they came at dawn. Everybody was asleep. She didn't even have hardly anything on. She wasn't wearing hardly anything. And they knocked on the door, and her husband answered, and they rushed in. And they said that they had a deportation order for her kids. And so the agents took her and her 6- and 9-year-old sons into custody and drove them to a detention center in South Texas, and will fly them back to El Salvador once the deportation order is processed, if they're not the ones that were not supposed to get deported. So this is an example of how blatant and unfair this process is. And I want to go a little bit more about some of the part of the reason why so many lawyers and the Southern Poverty Law Center, like I mentioned, and other organizations like that, are saying that this is totally a violation of not only international laws, but it's also a violation of even the rule of law in the United States. So this is completely illegal, what is happening. Because the children and families, many of the advocates are pointing out that already so many of these mothers were in complete trauma. You have to remember that many came because one of their children had already been killed by violence in Central America, and they fled as a result of already losing one child or a husband or a family member. You know, everyone who comes has experienced some horrible, horrible terror. Then you go through the horrible, horrible terror of crossing from Central America and making your way through Mexico, where you face rape if you're a woman, where you lose your documents, where so many migrants fall off trains and lose their limbs. The drug cartels in Mexico are especially targeted migrants to steal from them and carry out all kinds of horror, hold them for ransom, so that families in the United States get calls from these cartels all the time. You know, we meet people all the time who tell us that they all have to get together to raise $10,000, $15,000 to send to the cartels to let their families loose. You hear that all the time. So these migrants have already experienced the most horrific terror as it is. Then they come across and they never know what's going to happen, and then they have these raids. So many of these mothers are already, and fathers, not just the women, of course, but so many of these parents are already suffering incredible PTSD, and are told that they're being deported because they didn't go to court. Yet, we find out that many of these migrants never received their paperwork, or many receive their paperwork only in English, or go to court and no one speaks Spanish. You know, I think Ruben and many of us have the experience of accompanying migrants to court, and they don't always have people in Spanish. You might find someone in New York that speaks Spanish, but not across the country. So many of the lawyers are pointing out that the laws have changed and the policy has changed so much that not even the lawyers understand what's going on necessarily right now, much less a 7-year-old child who may not have an adult with her. And this is actually happening. Children are going to court with no adults because their parents sent them. There are thousands of children from age 4 or 5 to 17 that are being sent without parents, and many of these are being forced to go to court without a family member or a close friend, and are going to court and don't know what the heck's going on, and are facing deportation orders. And while they wait, you know, if they don't get their papers straightened out, then they're getting deported. So I'm going to end with that. I want to just sort of, some of the things that we have to be very mindful about the current crisis. 121 people were picked up. We have no idea if the Obama administration is going to carry out further raids like this. It may have been a trial balloon to see what happened. Many, of course, media are saying that Obama's doing this because of Trump, because everybody, the media, the government, everyone is somehow taking this fascist Hitler scumbag, exactly, as some sort of barometer of what you're supposed to do. Today Ted Cruz came out even further to the right than Trump on immigration policy. So we don't know if this action, which is criminal, anti-worker, racist, horrible, we don't know if they were doing it just to counter Trump at this moment. And we don't know if raids are going to continue. If the raids continue, we have got to step up our solidarity. We've got to step up our condemnation. We have to work with all the movement that has been out there. And one of the key things that we can do is to broaden the support and try to get labor and the anti-war activists and go beyond the sectors of the immigrant rights movement to get support, to condemn these raids. One of the things that has been very important is for us to struggle to try to unite the immigration rights movement with the movement of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's a challenge, but in the seeds of that unity and the seeds of that solidarity is victory for all of us. So that's it.
Okay, so we're going to hear from Tony Ehrenstein, who went to the exciting ICE Free New York demonstration today.
Happened, or the news of the raids broke out mainly on Monday, which was also the date when news came out about the economy doing so bad. Remember, the Dow Jones went down, and we know that historically when the economy in the United States and other imperialist or developed countries is doing poorly, that is when they especially go after migrants and carry out the witch hunt and carry out the deportations. And why Obama has earned the name of deporter-in-chief, because he has deported, or his administration has deported more workers than any other U.S. administration, which is kind of really unfortunate, that the first black president has that legacy that he has to encounter. All the deportations, all the workers that were raided and deported this week all came from southern states. This is important to note and this sort of deals possibly as to why Obama carried out the raids. And it also says why I said early on that we have to sort of monitor the situation. We said in the headline of the meeting that I was going to talk about the mass deportations, but when you think about it, of course it's horrible, it's criminal, it's wrong, it's illegal, it's racist, but 120 workers is not mass exactly when you consider the tens of thousands of particular Central Americans who have come in the last 2 years. There's about 200,000 plus people who have come in the last 2 years from Central America. So 120 of those is not a high numbers. And so we have to see why he is. Are they going to continue the raids? Are there going to be more? Or was this some sort of just little cover to give to the right wing? Now, some are saying that the reasons that he carried out the deportations and the raids was that Obama has an executive order that he wrote a couple of years ago where he actually did something more or less progressive and helpful that gave people who had come here before they were 15 or 16, I forgot, sort of gave them the right to stay here, and they wouldn't have to be deported. And southern states in particular, but not just southern states, but mainly southern states like Arizona, Texas, and other, reactionary states challenged that executive order and have bucked it, actually. And Obama had to go to court to defend that executive order. So some are saying that the raids of Monday are to show, well, look, I have this executive order, but I am going to deport some of these folks, and that he did it because the ruling is going to be heard at the Supreme Court in the coming days. So some are saying that perhaps that's why he did it. It might be. But what's going to be important is to monitor it. Are more raids going to continue? Are more deportations going to happen in that way? Or is this the end of it? Which would be interesting if it is. Bernie Sanders did come out forcefully against the raids and called on the Obama administration to stop doing them. And so did the other Democratic guy, McNamara, or what's his name? Yeah, him. He also came out of it. Clinton, first, I read two things. First thing she said was she had concerns about the raids. And then after a lot of flack because of what was going on, she did say that they were probably wrong. But I'm not positive of that second saying. I think that's the second thing she said. So, it's the main thing is we're going to have to monitor about whether there's going to be raids and whether it was indeed calculated to counter or answer this executive order that he has going to court. I think it's, Trump, of course, took full credit for the raids and tweeted immediately that it was because of him that Obama carried out the raids. Now, what's very interesting to me and why it's so important for us to, we had this incredible party conference where it became quite clear that especially young comrades in our party, but everyone was very excited about the Morehead Lilly campaign, right? And the election, so we need to gear up and get that campaign going and get Monica and Lamont and all the other representatives of the campaign out in the streets to counter and all of this, including going to detention centers and going to demonstrations and so forth to answer all of this. Because what's interesting is that some of the Latinos, including some of the MAD, the Mexican-American Democrats, even the mainstream Latinos are pretty pissed off on this issue. And they're very worried. Some of these Mexican-American Democrat types are saying that they're very worried about the election next year, that because of Obama's positions, the deportations and so forth, they're afraid that some of the Latino community that vote is going to boycott the elections or be apathetic and so forth and so on. And that could be true for the oppressed nation of the African American community as well, in light of the Obama administration's poor positions on the killings of black youth and others, right? And if that happens, what does that mean about Trump? If Trump, we all thought he was going to be gone by last October, and he still has the momentum. So it's very interesting if you have this growing right-wing situation. Sanders can fill stadiums and can have rallies and make speeches, and CNN doesn't cover those at over and over. Trump, they cover wherever he goes, and he's got lots of money. It's clear, it appears that the ruling class wants Clinton because she's the one getting all the money, right? But Bernie Sanders, on his own, has raised almost as much as Rodham Clinton, which is very interesting because he's done that without the super PAC. So, it's a very interesting election year for us. And if you have this with the apathy of the oppressed, who historically are the social base of the Democratic Party, it's a very, interesting thing to monitor. But the most important thing is that's why the election campaign is so important and why we're going to be meeting to strengthen that up. So with regards to Sarah's question, there are other actions called, but I don't know what they are. I kind of forgot. There's something in January, but people just check out their emails. There is supposed to be a follow-up action from today, and you'll get notice about it so that we can support those. And yes, indeed, all communities, even though this was targeting Central Americans, all undocumented immigrants felt the chill, no matter what. All communities, were threatened, and that's one of the goals of these raids, is to push people further underground. So, and so just finally, just to remember that when we talk about this, and in our propaganda and in our solidarity with this, we want to point out that these are refugees, and they deserve political asylum, and they deserve to be in the United States because of the terror that U.S. imperialism has brought to their homelands. And they are forced to leave because of U.S. policy, without a doubt. One of the women interviewed said, "I can tolerate living in poverty. I cannot tolerate living in war," and that's why she came. So, and that war is made at the White House, so we have to remember that.